Regardless if you are a seasoned professional or you are brand new to the insurance industry, on the road to becoming a preeminent producer, it's safe to say that you're going to face obstacles. And in this episode of the Preeminent Producer Podcast, I asked the question to the coaches to share a story. What is an example of an obstacle that you have faced and how did you overcome it? So in this episode, we're going to be hearing from Rick Gregson tell his story of an obstacle he faced and how he overcame. Let's dive in.
Are you a commercial insurance producer struggling to stand out from the competition? Do you find it challenging to grow your book of business and create a fulfilling career? If so, then welcome to the Preeminent Producer Podcast. Each week, we'll be tackling important topics, sharing proven strategies and insights from successful producers that are in the trenches and have traveled the journey to becoming a preeminent producer. You'll discover what it really takes to become preeminent and build your book of business in a way that isn't being taught anywhere else. Our hosts are experts in the field and have built thriving businesses by becoming the most trusted advisor to their clients. Welcome to your journey to becoming a preeminent producer. Let's dive in.
Like any producer who's been in business for a while, I probably have a lot of them, because we fall a lot before we get up and run. And life isn't easy. Business isn't fair. It's a full contact sport. And but there's one that sticks out in my mind. And I was a young producer, and I wrote my first large account, and I was so pleased. I remember talking to the underwriter about it, and it was time to bind coverage. I went out, made my presentation. They said, yes, we want to. It was a very large nonprofit. We want to buy insurance from you. And I thought, oh, that's great. Came back, and I was a Travelers underwriter, and I called him up and I said, hey, Doug, we're going to write this. And he said, okay, hey, listen, I want to tell you something. Make sure you get money, because the minute I bind this son of a gun, it's accruing dollars. That scared me to death. And I did, and all was well. So I kept the account for several years and had an incredibly great relationship with the CFO and the CEO. There was a change at the top. Now, again, I am a young producer here. I'm probably 28 years old and it's not very savvy in the world of insurance. And all of a sudden I get this thing that they're going to do an RFP. I'm thinking, I didn't know what an RFP was. I didn't really do an investigation. I was working, it's before I had my own agency. I was working in a kind of a regional agency with a bunch of knotheads that really had small books of business. And I didn't seek out help to figure out what an RFP was. I went in and did it myself and did a very miserable job. Didn't even understand what it was. And of course, lost the account. And it was a real wake-up call. It was devastating to me as a young producer who needed the money, who needed the experience. And it took me a while to get over that. But then the good thing about that, it's not what happens, it's what you do about it. And it became a tremendous learning experience for me on a number of levels. I now know, believe it or not, what an RFP is. Done many of them, done them really well. But more importantly than that, it was knowing not only the technical side of the business, but the other side of the business. What is an RFP? How do you prepare for it? You need to seek out help from the insurance carriers, from other people in the agency if you're a young producer and never done one of these, from your support staff, from anybody you can possibly think of, including going to people who do RFPs in other industries. In other words, one of my large clients now is a large restaurant supply company. And they do RFPs, and sit down with one of their better salesmen or women and say, okay, what do you do it? Because, I just had lunch the other day with a very successful stockbroker and his son. His son is taking over his business. And we all have used euphemisms in our past of what we do. We sell insurance. They sell stocks and bonds. And he was real emphatic. He teaches that. Everybody sells. So the point is selling. Go to successful salespeople. Find out what makes them tick. Find out how they do RFPs. Find out all of those kind of things about them and make yourself better. I now from that went back, right, some very large nonprofits have done so for years and years and years. But that was a devastating day in my insurance career that came out to be one of the best days of my insurance career, looking at it through the rearview mirror. I learned, and we're all going to get knocked down, and it's not going to be fair, and it's not going to be easy. But you've got to be able to learn from those experiences, to see them in the future, to learn, to be able to handle it the next time it comes up, because you know what? In some form or fashion, it's going to present itself again, and you'll be ready.
Rick, there were kind of two takeaways that I jotted down from that story. One of them is there's kind of a cliche or some expression out there, something like, it's not as important what happens to you, but how you react to it, when things happen to you, something like that. And boy, Paul, you had said the journey to being preeminent is not always easy. And boy, it's never, I guess it's never easy. And so we're always going to have those situations. It's so great that you were able to take something from that. The other thing that jumped out at me, and it's not always easy to do this, but it sure does help, it's just not being afraid to ask others for help,
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the lessons I've learned, I think, over the last 40 years of doing this, a little bit of a tangent, but not much of a tangent here, guys. But one of the things, when I was young, I always kind of thought that I sort of knew it all. And the longer I live, I realize that, other people have legitimate good ideas too. I'm not always right, so not being afraid to ask others for help in those situations, it's a way to go.
If you think you know it all, and many of us did when we were young, there's no opportunity to learn. If you think you know it all, there's no more to learn, number one. And number two, I probably mentioned this once before, reading a book, and the title of the book is the book. I don't remember anything about the book, who wrote it, who the author was, how big it was. But the title of the book is, it's not what happens, it's what you do about it.
Yeah.
And that's the book. I mean, that really is. We're going to face situations that are beyond our control, that are not fair. And we're going to have to sit down and we're going to think, okay, this is what's happened. What am I going to do? Am I going to yell and scream? Am I going to cry and kick the dog? Hopefully not. Or am I going to sit down? Am I going to learn from this thing? Am I going to go forward and say, okay, I'll never do that again? Or I'll recognize that when I'm in that situation again. I think we learn more from our defeats than we do our victories. So that's why it's important. That's why defeats are important. I hope you minimize them, but they become catastrophes if you don't learn something from them.
Yeah, you just got to be able to pick yourself up and keep going.
Yeah.
And we've probably all known people. I'm thinking of one producer years ago in my agency who, he could just never let go of those defeats. It just ate him up he just wasn't ultimately cut out for it. So, he quit so you got to, I guess I'm going to state the obvious. What can I learn from this? And then implement that and then move on. Hey, Rick, I'm just curious, since that was such a big account early in your career, how long did it take you, if you recall, to get back to even, to replace that income?
That's a good question. I would say I did it the next year. I mean, it's such a wake-up call. It's like, oh my God. And I was poor. It was my biggest account. And it really motivated me through, you can be motivated through all kinds of things. You can be motivated because you're money motivated. But I was money motivated out of necessity. I had a young family. I had to go out and do it. So I hustled my tail off and went out. That's a good question. I replaced it that year through several accounts.
Rick, what advice would you give to maybe a young producer that has experienced something similar to what you experienced? And I know Matt just brought up someone who ended up giving up because it just, the failure ate at him. What piece of advice would you give to a younger producer that's going through something similar?
Well, I think the one thing you have to remember about this, it's not a job, it's a career. And we've said that many times on these calls. You have to have persistence. You have to understand that this is a great career for those who it's a great career for, if you'll pardon the preposition at the end of the sentence there. You're going to face adversity. And I don't care what you do. If you want to become preeminent, if you want to put in the time to excel, challenges are going to come. And those preeminent people find a way to get over those hurdles and recover from them. It's worth doing. It's such a great career. It gives you the opportunity to do so many things that I couldn't have done in any other career. And you've got to be dedicated to the idea that it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's a career over a long period of time, and it builds and builds and builds. It gets better and as you learn more about it. So be patient, perseverance, prevail.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you're encouraged by that. If you are facing your own obstacle, know that this is all part of the process, and how you handle the process as well as the struggle is huge. Now, I want you to stay tuned for part 2 next week, when we hear what we're calling the gut punch story from Christian, and we're also going to be hearing from Matt Starkey as well on obstacles that they face. So you don't want to miss that. If you've enjoyed this story and you'd like more information about how to be coached by these guys, definitely visit us at thepreeminentproducer.com. And again, we'll see you in the next episode for part 2 of the Preeminent Producer Podcast.
Thanks so much for joining us on this episode of the Preeminent Producer Podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to subscribe, rate, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Once again, thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next episode of the Preeminent Producer Podcast.